Branded broke in the planner's office, I didn't explode. I counterattacked with one call that shocked everyone and rewired our family's future.
My daughter looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything between us forever. "Dad, you're broke. You can't afford anything I actually want." The wedding planner's office fell silent. My wife's face went pale, and something inside me snapped, but not in the way you think. I didn't get angry. I didn't storm out. Instead, I smiled, pulled out my phone, and made one call that would give Sarah the wedding of her dreams, while teaching her the most important lesson of her life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. You see, Sarah had no idea who she was dealing with. For 26 years, I'd been the dad who drove the 10-year-old Honda, who clipped coupons, who turned down the thermostat and wore sweaters in winter. The dad who said no to designer clothes and yes to thrift store finds. The dad who took our family vacations to state parks instead of Disney World. In Sarah's eyes, I was just another middle-class father struggling to make ends meet. What she didn't know was that every single one of those choices had been deliberate. Every coupon clipped, every thermostat adjustment, every used car purchase had been part of a plan 30 years in the making. A plan that had quietly built something she couldn't even imagine. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in March. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee from the same chipped mug I'd used for 15 years when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, we need to talk about the wedding budget. Mom says you can only do $10,000. That won't even cover the flowers I want." I stared at that message for a long time. $10,000. That's what Linda, my wife, had told Sarah we could afford. It wasn't a lie exactly. $10,000 was what we'd agreed was reasonable for a wedding. But reasonable and possible were two very different things. Linda walked into the kitchen, already dressed for her job at the elementary school where she'd taught third grade for 22 years. "Sarah's upset about the budget," she said, pouring her coffee into a travel mug. "She's been crying all morning." I nodded, still staring at my phone. "What kind of flowers does she want?" "Peonies. White peonies for everything. The bridal bouquet, centerpieces, ceremony decorations. Do you know what peonies cost in September?" Linda shook her head. $300 just for her bouquet. $300 for flowers that will die in a week. $300. I spent more than that on lunch some days, but Linda didn't know that. Nobody knew that. "Maybe we should meet with this wedding planner she found," I said. "See what we're really talking about." Linda raised her eyebrows. "Robert, we can't afford a wedding planner." Sarah found her on Instagram. She charges $200 just for the consultation. I pulled up my banking app on my phone, something I did probably 50 times a day out of habit. The number at the top hadn't changed since yesterday. It never really changed much anymore, except to grow. Let's just see what she has to say. That afternoon, we found ourselves in Madison Blake's office in the trendy part of downtown. Madison was exactly what you'd expect from someone who planned weddings for wealthy families. Mid-30s, perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than Linda's monthly salary. Her office was all white furniture and gold accents, with a wall covered in photos of elaborate ceremonies that looked like they belonged in magazines. Sarah sat across from Madison's glass desk, her eyes bright with excitement and possibility. She'd brought a folder thick with magazine clippings and Pinterest printouts. Every page showed something more expensive than the last. Cascading floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, venues that looked like European castles. "So," Madison said, opening a leather portfolio, "tell me about your vision." Sarah launched into her dream wedding with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been planning it since she was 12. The outdoor ceremony at Willowbrook Manor, the most exclusive venue in the county. A reception for 200 guests with a live band, not a DJ. Dinner stations instead of a sit-down meal, but with premium options like lobster and filet mignon. A 7-tier cake from the French bakery downtown. Flowers everywhere. White peonies and roses and baby's breath creating a garden paradise. As Sarah talked, Madison took notes and nodded encouragingly. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, probably calculating costs in her head. I just listened, watching my daughter describe a day that would cost more than most people's cars. When Sarah finished, Madison smiled professionally and flipped through her notes. "It sounds absolutely magical. Let me put together some numbers for you." For the next 20 minutes, Madison broke down costs with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Venue rental, catering, flowers, photography, music, decorations, transportation. Each line item made Linda wince. By the time Madison finished, she'd outlined a wedding that would cost $68,000. $68,000? Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sarah's face fell. But that's for everything I showed you. The full vision. Sweetie, Linda said gently, we talked about this. Our budget is $10,000. That's already stretching things for us. Sarah turned to look at me, her eyes filling with tears. Dad, can't you do something? Can't you pick up extra shifts or get a loan or something? I worked in IT for a mid-sized manufacturing company. As far as my family knew, I made a decent living, but nothing spectacular. $55,000 a year, maybe $60,000 with overtime. Enough to keep us comfortable, but not wealthy. Not wealthy enough for $68,000 weddings. Sarah, I said carefully, that's more than I make in a year. I know, but this is my wedding. This is supposed to be the most important day of my life. Her voice cracked with emotion. All my friends are having beautiful weddings. Emma's parents spent $40,000 on hers last summer. Even Rachel, whose dad works at the grocery store, had a $15,000 wedding. Madison cleared her throat diplomatically. We could look at some alternatives. Perhaps a smaller guest list, or a different venue, or... No, Sarah's voice turned sharp. I don't want alternatives. I want what I showed you. I want the wedding I've been dreaming about my whole life. The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of Madison's air purifier. Linda reached over and took Sarah's hand. Honey, sometimes we have to adjust our dreams to fit reality. That's when Sarah said it, the words that would echo in my mind for days afterward. Reality? The reality is that Dad is broke. You're both broke. You can't afford anything I actually want. You're going to make me have some pathetic ceremony in the church basement with grocery store flowers and a DJ who plays music from the 80s. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison pretended to organize her papers, clearly uncomfortable. Linda's face had gone white, and I felt something shift inside me, like a door that had been locked for decades suddenly swinging open. Broke. She thought I was broke. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful young woman who'd inherited her mother's kind heart and my stubborn determination, and realized that in trying to teach her the value of money, I taught her that money was something we didn't have. For 26 years, I'd lived modestly to show her that happiness didn't come from material things. I'd driven old cars to teach her that status symbols were meaningless. I'd shopped at discount stores to show her that smart spending was more important than brand names. But somewhere along the way, my lessons had become her reality. She didn't see a father who chose simplicity. She saw a father who couldn't afford anything better. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Not the checking account that Linda knew about, the one where my paychecks got deposited and our bills got paid. The other account, the one I'd been building for 30 years through careful investments, side projects, and the kind of financial discipline that most people couldn't imagine. The number on the screen was bigger than Madison's entire annual revenue, bigger than the cost of Sarah's dream wedding multiplied by 20. I looked up at the three women staring at me, Linda confused and hurt, Madison professional but cautious, Sarah angry and disappointed. Madison, I said, my voice steady, I'd like to book everything Sarah described. The full package. When do you need the deposit? The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on Madison's wall. Sarah's mouth fell open. Linda grabbed my arm. Robert, what are you doing? Linda whispered. I kept my eyes on Madison. How much do you need to secure the date and start planning? Madison blinked several times, clearly trying to process what had just happened. Typically, I require a 25% deposit to begin planning. That would be $17,000. I nodded and pulled out my wallet. Not the worn leather wallet I carried every day with my credit cards and driver's license. The other wallet, the one with the black American Express card that had no spending limit. Will you take payment today? Sarah found her voice first. Dad, what's happening? Where are you getting this money? I handed the black card to Madison, who took it with the reverence of someone who'd only seen cards like this in movies. Your father, I said to Sarah, isn't broke. Your father has been very, very careful with money for a very long time. And today you're going to learn the difference between choosing not to spend money and not having money to spend. Madison's hands were actually shaking as she processed the payment. $17,000, approved instantly. The kind of transaction that would make most people's credit cards catch fire. Linda was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Robert, I don't understand. How do you have this kind of money? Where did it come from? That's when I realized that my plan to teach Sarah about money had kept everyone in the dark. Even Linda, my wife of 28 years, had no idea what our real financial situation looked like. I said, standing up from my chair, it's time I showed both of you something I probably should have shared a long time ago. The car ride home was the quietest 20 minutes of my marriage. Linda sat in the passenger seat, alternately staring at me and out the window. Sarah followed us in her car, probably calling her fiancé to tell him that her boring, broke father had just done something completely impossible. When we got to the house, I led them both to my home office, the small room where I paid bills and supposedly worked on my computer in the evenings. Linda had been in here thousands of times, but she'd never really looked at what was on the monitors. I powered up my main computer and logged into my investment accounts. Then I turned the screen so both women could see it. The number at the top of the page had 8 digits before the decimal point. Sarah made a sound like someone had knocked the air out of her lungs. Linda just stared, her mouth opening and closing without making any sound. $3.2 million, I said quietly. That's what 30 years of living below your means and investing the difference looks like. How? Linda's voice barely qualified as a whisper. How is this possible? We've been married for 28 years. I balance our checkbook. I see what comes in and what goes out. I pulled up another screen, this one showing a detailed breakdown of income streams she'd never known existed. Remember when I started that consulting business 15 years ago? The one I said was just helping small companies with their computer problems on weekends? She nodded slowly. It wasn't just computer problems. I was building entire IT infrastructures for growing businesses. That little side project has been bringing in between $8,000 and $12,000 a month for the past decade. I scrolled down to show her the payment history. Every penny went straight into investments. Sarah dropped into the chair behind her, her face pale. You've been making an extra $100,000 a year and we never knew? That's not even the biggest part, I continued, opening another account. Remember the rental property I bought 20 years ago? The duplex on Maple Street that I said was barely breaking even? The one you're always complaining about, Linda said, her voice getting stronger with confusion and something that might have been anger. The one with the tenants who are always calling about broken toilets and heating problems. That duplex is now worth $400,000. But more importantly, I used the equity from that property to buy 3 more rental properties over the years, then 2 small commercial buildings, then a share in the apartment complex downtown. I pulled up a real estate portfolio that showed properties across the city. The rental income alone is about $15,000 a month. The room went completely silent. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Peterson walking her dog, the same routine she'd followed for the 8 years we'd lived in this house. Everything normal and ordinary, while inside our modest living room, my family's understanding of reality was collapsing. But you drive that horrible Honda, Sarah said weakly. You wear the same 5 shirts to work every week. You make mom shop with coupons. I drive that Honda because it's reliable and paid for. I wear those shirts because they're comfortable and I don't care what people at work think about my clothes. And your mother uses coupons because saving money on groceries means more money available for investing. I turned to look at Linda, though I probably should have told you that the grocery money you saved was going towards something bigger. Linda was studying the computer screen like she was trying to decode a foreign language. The vacations, she said slowly. All those years I thought we couldn't afford to go anywhere nice. I felt so guilty watching our friends take their kids to Europe and Disney World while we went camping in state parks. We could have afforded those trips, I admitted. But I thought the camping trips were better for Sarah. I thought teaching her that experiences didn't have to cost a fortune would help her understand that money wasn't the most important thing in life. Well, that backfired spectacularly, Sarah said, and for the first time since we'd left Madison's office, there was a hint of her usual humor in her voice. I spent my entire childhood thinking we were one emergency away from losing the house. The weight of that statement hit me harder than I'd expected. You thought we might lose the house? Dad, you used to stress about the electric bill every month. You'd walk around turning off lights and complaining about the cost of heating. When the washing machine broke, you and Mom had those long, worried conversations about whether we could afford to fix it or if we'd have to use the laundromat until tax refund season. I remembered those conversations differently. I'd been concerned about unnecessary spending, about making smart financial choices. But through Sarah's eyes, those careful decisions had looked like desperation. Linda was scrolling through the investment accounts now, her teacher's mind trying to process the numbers. Robert, this says you bought Amazon stock in 1999, and Apple in 2003. and something called Bitcoin in 2012. I've always been interested in technology. When I saw companies that I thought were going to change the world, I invested in them. Not huge amounts at first, just what we could afford after covering our real expenses. I pulled up the transaction history. $1,000 here, $2,000 there. But compound interest over 20 years turns small investments into life-changing money. Sarah leaned forward to look at the Bitcoin transactions. Dad, do you realize what Bitcoin is worth now compared to what you paid for it? I know exactly what it's worth. I also know that for every Bitcoin success story, there are 100 people who lost money on investments that seem like sure things. That's why I never put more than 5% of our assets into any single risky investment. But you put money into it when people thought it was fake internet money, Sarah said. How did you know? I didn't know. That's why it was only 5%. But I understood the technology behind it, and I could see how it might be useful someday. Same with Amazon when everyone thought selling books online was a ridiculous idea. Linda closed the laptop and turned to face me directly. Why didn't you tell me? In 28 years of marriage, why didn't you tell me we were wealthy? It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd been preparing to answer for years. Because wealth changes people, and I didn't want it to change us. But it did change us, Sarah said quietly. It changed us into people who thought we couldn't afford anything. It changed us into a family where the daughter grows up thinking her father is a failure because he can't pay for the wedding she wants. The accusation stung because it was fair. I thought I was teaching you that money wasn't important. You taught me that not having money was our normal. There's a difference, Dad. Linda stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard with its modest garden and aging fence. I need to understand something, she said without turning around. When I wanted to redo the kitchen 5 years ago, and you said we couldn't afford it, was that true? We could have afforded 10 kitchen renovations, but I liked our kitchen. I thought it was fine the way it was. When Sarah needed money for her senior trip to Washington, D.C., and we made her get a part-time job to earn half of it herself, we could have written a check for the full amount without thinking about it. When my car broke down last year, and I spent 3 weeks taking the bus to work because you said we needed to shop around for the best deal on a used car, I didn't answer that one because we all knew the answer. Linda turned around, and I could see tears in her eyes. Robert, I have spent 28 years of my life believing that we were just getting by. I have said no to myself and to Sarah for things we wanted because I thought we couldn't afford them. I have felt guilty about every small luxury, every unnecessary purchase, every moment when I wanted something just because I wanted it, not because we needed it. I wanted you to be happy with what we had. I was happy with what we had, she said, her voice rising for the first time. But I would have been happier knowing that we chose what we had instead of being stuck with it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her expression was different, more thoughtful, less angry. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. I nodded. The wedding you just paid for, the $68,000 wedding, is that going to hurt you financially at all? I pulled up my banking app one more time and showed her the account balance. Even after Madison's $17,000 charge, the number had barely moved. Sarah, I could pay for your entire wedding with the money I make from investments in a single month. The $68,000 represents about 6 days of passive income. She stared at the screen for a long time. So when I called you broke, you were describing someone who has the opposite problem. I have more money than I know what to do with, and I've been so focused on not letting it change who we are that I forgot to let you know who we really are. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of misunderstanding and good intentions gone wrong. Outside, the ordinary sounds of our ordinary neighborhood continued. Dogs barking, lawnmowers running, children playing in yards. The soundtrack of the life I thought I was protecting by keeping our wealth a secret. Finally, Sarah spoke. I need to call David and tell him that my father isn't broke. He's going to think I've lost my mind. What are you going to tell him? She thought about it for a moment. That I've been an idiot, and that we're about to have a very expensive wedding that I'm not sure I deserve. You deserve it, I said, and I meant it, but maybe not for the reasons you think. Sarah looked confused, so I continued. You don't deserve it because you're my daughter, or because it's your wedding, or because you've been dreaming about it your whole life. You deserve it because you're about to learn something that took me 30 years to figure out, which is that money is a tool, not a goal. And I've been using that tool wrong for a very long time. Linda sat back down, her anger seeming to deflate into exhaustion. So, what happens now? Do we suddenly start living like millionaires? Do we move to a mansion and buy luxury cars and join the country club? That's up to you, I said. Both of you. But I think we need to have some conversations about what we actually want our lives to look like. Over the next week, those conversations happened in fragments. Over dinner, during car rides, in quiet moments when one of us would suddenly think of another question about our hidden wealth. Linda wanted to know why I'd never told her about the rental properties when she complained about our neighbor's constant construction noise. Sarah wanted to understand how I'd learned to invest when she'd never seen me read a financial book or watch business news. The truth was, I'd been living a double life for so long that I'd forgotten how exhausting it was to maintain the facade. At work, I was Robert the IT guy who brought his lunch in a brown bag and drove a car with a dented bumper. At home, I was Dad who worried about utility bills and comparison shopped for insurance. But online, in the early hours of the morning before anyone else woke up, I was someone who moved thousands of dollars between investment accounts and researched emerging market opportunities. I think I understand why you did it, Sarah said on Thursday evening. We were sitting in the living room, the same room where she used to do homework while I watched TV and Linda graded papers. You were trying to protect us from becoming the kind of people we both hate. What kind of people? Entitled, wasteful. The kind of people who think money solves every problem, and that expensive things are automatically better than cheap things. She was right, but it was more complicated than that. I was also protecting myself, I admitted. I grew up poor, really poor. Not the kind of poor where you can't afford vacations. The kind of poor where you sometimes can't afford food. Linda looked surprised. In all our years together, I'd rarely talked about my childhood in detail. My father worked construction when he could find work, which wasn't often. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. I remember being 7 years old and understanding that the electricity might get turned off if Dad didn't find a job that week. I paused, remembering the weight of that constant anxiety. When I started making real money, when the investments began paying off, I was terrified that it would disappear, so I kept living like it might. But it's been growing for decades, Sarah pointed out. At some point, didn't you realize it wasn't going to disappear? Intellectually, yes. Emotionally, no. Fear doesn't respond to spreadsheets and portfolio balances. Fear responds to what it learned when you were young and vulnerable. On Friday, David came over for dinner. Sarah's fiancé was a good man, steady and kind, who worked as a high school history teacher and coached the debate team. He made $38,000 a year and considered himself fortunate to have found a job doing something he loved. When Sarah told him about our real financial situation, his first response was to worry that she'd expect a lifestyle he couldn't provide. David, I said as we sat down to eat Linda's pot roast, the same recipe she'd been making for 20 years. What do you know about compound interest? He looked confused by the question. The basic concept, money earning interest on the interest it's already earned? Right. Now let me ask you this. If you started investing $500 a month right now, and you got an average return of 7% per year, how much money would you have when you retire? I have no idea. A lot? I pulled out my phone and opened a compound interest calculator. Assuming you're 25 now and you retire at 65, you'd have approximately $1.3 million. David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. That can't be right. It's right. $500 a month, invested consistently for 40 years, becomes generational wealth. That's the power of starting early and being patient. Sarah was watching this conversation with interest. Dad, are you offering to teach David how to invest? I'm offering to teach both of you. Everything I've learned, everything I've figured out through 30 years of trial and error and research. But only if you want to learn. David set down his fork entirely. Mr. Patterson, I make $38,000 a year. After rent and student loans and groceries, I don't have $500 a month to invest. You will after the wedding? I said, because Sarah's student loans are getting paid off next week. The room went quiet again. Sarah's student loans totaled $43,000, a debt that had been hanging over her head since graduation, affecting every financial decision she and David made together. Dad, you can't just... I can, and I am, but not as a gift. I looked at both of them seriously. Consider it an investment in your financial education. I'm paying off the loans, but in exchange, you both commit to learning everything I can teach you about building wealth. Think of it as a very expensive college course. David looked overwhelmed. Sir, that's incredibly generous, but I don't know if I can accept. You're not accepting charity, I interrupted. You're accepting an opportunity to never have to worry about money the way I worried about it when I was your age. The way Linda worried about it for 28 years, because I was too stubborn to admit that financial security was something we'd already achieved. Linda reached over and took my hand. Robert, what about the kitchen renovation I wanted? I squeezed her hand. What about it? Can we do it now? Can we finally have the kitchen I've been dreaming about for 5 years? We can have any kitchen you want. We can tear down the entire back wall and add a sunroom if that's what would make you happy. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since this whole revelation began. I don't want to tear down walls. I just want granite countertops and a kitchen island and one of those fancy refrigerators with the ice maker in the door. Then that's what you'll have. Sarah was quiet through this exchange, and I could see her processing something. Finally, she spoke up. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise to tell me the truth. Always. The wedding Madison planned for me, the $68,000 wedding with the peonies and the live band and the 7-tier cake. Is that what you want for me? Or is that what you think I want? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, now that I know money isn't an issue, now that I know you could afford to give me anything I asked for, I need to figure out what I actually want versus what I thought I wanted because I couldn't have it. David nodded. That's a really good point. Sarah, when you were describing your dream wedding to the planner, were you describing something you genuinely wanted, or were you describing the most expensive version of everything because you were frustrated about the budget? Sarah thought about this for a long moment. I honestly don't know. I've been planning this wedding in my head for so long, but I think a lot of those plans were based on what I saw other people having, not what would actually make me happy. So what would make you happy? Linda asked. I want to marry David. I want our families there. I want it to be beautiful and memorable. Sarah paused. But I don't know if I need 200 people or a 7-tier cake or flowers that cost more than most people's rent. Then let's figure it out, I said. We've got time. The deposit is paid, but nothing else is locked in. Madison can adjust the plans based on what you actually want, not what you think you should want. What if what I actually want costs $20,000 instead of $68,000? Then we save $48,000 and put it toward your future. Maybe a down payment on a house, or seed money for David to start the tutoring business he's always talked about, or just a really solid foundation for your investment portfolio. David looked interested. You think I could actually start a tutoring business? With the right planning and capital, absolutely. There's a huge demand for academic support, especially for students preparing for standardized tests. You've got the teaching experience and the subject matter expertise. You just need help with the business side of things. And you'd help with that? I'd help with whatever you wanted to learn. Business planning, marketing, financial management, tax strategy. Consider it part of your financial education. Sarah was smiling now, but it was different from her earlier excitement about the elaborate wedding. This smile was quieter, more thoughtful. You know what's funny? 3 days ago, I thought my biggest problem was having a father who couldn't afford to give me the wedding I wanted. Now I'm realizing my biggest problem is figuring out what I actually want when money isn't a factor. That's not a problem, Linda said. That's freedom. The freedom to choose what matters to you instead of what you think you can afford. Or what you think you should want because other people have it, I added. We spent the rest of dinner talking about possibilities instead of limitations. David's business ideas, Linda's dream of taking art classes at the community college, Sarah's interest in maybe going back to school for her master's degree. Conversations we'd never had because we'd all been operating under the assumption that dreams were luxuries we couldn't afford. After David left and Sarah went home to her apartment, Linda and I sat in our living room with cups of tea. The same living room where we'd watched Sarah grow up, where we'd had thousands of conversations about everything and nothing. But tonight felt different. I'm not angry anymore, Linda said quietly. I wasn't sure you ever would be. I'm still confused. I'm still processing. But I understand why you did it, even if I wish you'd done it differently. I nodded. I should have told you. I should have trusted you to handle the knowledge responsibly. Yes, you should have. But I also understand why you were scared. Money changes things, even when you don't want it to. How do you think it will change us now? Linda considered this. I think it will change us back. Back to the people we were before we were constantly worried about affording things. before every purchase was a negotiation with ourselves about whether we really needed it. She was right. I could already feel the difference. The constant low-level anxiety about money that I'd carried for so long was gone. Not because we had more money than we'd had yesterday, but because everyone finally knew we had it. Linda, can I ask you something? After 30 years of marriage, I think you've earned the right to ask me anything. Are you happy? Not about the money, but with our life, with the choices we've made, the way we've lived. She set down her tea and really looked at me. I've been happy, Robert, even when I thought we were struggling, even when I was worried about bills or frustrated that we couldn't afford things I wanted. I was happy because we built something good together. We raised a daughter who cares about other people. We've been partners in everything that mattered. But I think I'll be happier now, not because of what we can buy, but because of what we can stop worrying about, and because of what we can do for other people. What do you mean? I mean Sarah's student loans, David's business, my sister who's been struggling since her husband lost his job, the scholarship fund at my school that never has enough money to help all the kids who need it. Linda smiled. I mean having the power to solve problems instead of just worrying about them. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the last 3 days, how quickly everything had changed and how little had actually changed at the same time. We were still the same people, in the same house, with the same relationships and values. But now those relationships and values had room to breathe, space to grow without the constant pressure of financial constraint. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, I've been thinking about the wedding. Can we meet with Madison again next week? I want to redesign everything, but this time I want to plan a wedding that's about what David and I actually want, not what I thought I couldn't have. I texted back, of course, take your time. Figure out what will make you happy, not what will impress other people. Thanks, Dad, and I'm sorry I called you broke. You're definitely not broke. No, I typed back, but I was broken in a different way. Hopefully we can fix that together. The response came quickly. Already fixed, Dad. We just needed to start telling each other the truth. Saturday morning brought something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. I woke up without immediately checking my phone for investment updates or mentally calculating monthly expenses. For the first time since I'd started building our hidden wealth, I didn't feel like I was living two separate lives. Linda was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a notepad covered in her neat teacher handwriting. She looked up when I walked in, and her smile was different somehow. Lighter. I've been researching kitchen renovations, she said, turning the screen toward me. Look at this island design, and these countertops. I never let myself really look before because I knew we couldn't afford it. I poured my coffee and sat down beside her. The designs were beautiful, exactly the kind of upgrade that would transform our dated kitchen into something from a magazine. 6 months ago, Linda wouldn't have even bookmarked these photos. How much are we talking about? I asked. $42,000 for everything I want. The works. She paused, still adjusting to our new reality. Is that okay? I know it's a lot of money. Linda, it's not a lot of money for us. Not anymore. If that's what you want, that's what you'll have. She closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Robert, I need to understand something. When you were building all of this wealth, all these years of investments and rental properties and side businesses, what was the end goal? What were you planning to do with all that money? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since Thursday. Honestly, I don't think I ever had a clear end goal. At first, it was about security, making sure we'd never be poor like I was as a kid. Then it became about proving to myself that I could build something significant. Somewhere along the way, it just became a habit. A habit of making money or a habit of not spending it? Both. I got addicted to watching the numbers grow. Every month, seeing the accounts get bigger felt like winning some kind of game, but I never thought about what winning actually meant. Linda nodded slowly. So we've been living like poor people while you played a rich person's game. That's exactly what we've been doing, and I dragged you and Sarah into it without even asking if you wanted to play. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Madison Blake's name appeared on the screen. Good morning, Mr. Patterson. I hope I'm not calling too early. Sarah asked me to reach out about potentially revising her wedding plans. Not too early at all. What did she have in mind? She wants to start over completely, keep the venue and the date, but redesign everything else based on what she calls authentic preferences rather than budget rebellion. Those were her exact words. I laughed. That sounds like Sarah. What does that mean practically? She wants a smaller guest list, 100 people instead of 200. She wants the ceremony to be more intimate, more personal, less elaborate floral arrangements, but higher quality. A string quartet instead of a full band. A 4-tier cake instead of 7 tiers, but from a local baker who specializes in flavors that actually mean something to her and David. Linda was listening to my side of the conversation with growing approval. "That sounds much more like our Sarah," she whispered. "Madison, what does this revised plan cost?" "Approximately $31,000. It's still a premium wedding, but the focus is on quality and meaning rather than scale and spectacle." "Perfect. Whatever Sarah wants. But I want to add something to the budget." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "I want to pay for all the guests' hotel accommodations. Anyone traveling from out of town, put them up in nice hotels for the weekend. And I want to arrange transportation from the hotels to the venue and back. Make it so that attending Sarah's wedding doesn't cost her friends and family anything except their time." There was a pause. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Patterson. That would add approximately $15,000 to the total cost. Then we're at $46,000 total. Still less than what she originally planned, but focused on making sure everyone can be there without financial stress." After I hung up, Linda was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What?" I asked. "That thing you just did. Paying for everyone's travel expenses. That's not about money, is it? That's about something else." She was right, and I hadn't even realized it until she said it. When I was a kid, we missed a lot of family events because we couldn't afford to travel. My cousin's wedding, my uncle's funeral, graduations, birthdays. We got invitations, but everyone knew we couldn't come because we couldn't pay for gas and hotel rooms. So you're making sure no one misses Sarah's wedding for the same reason. I guess I am. Robert, that's not about financial security or investment strategy. That's about love. She was right. For the first time since this whole revelation started, I'd spent money not because we could afford it, but because it would solve a problem that mattered to me emotionally. "Maybe I'm finally learning the difference between having money and using money," I said. "Maybe we both are." That afternoon, Sarah and David came over to discuss their revised wedding plans. Sarah spread Madison's new proposals across our dining room table, and I could see immediately that this version was more personal, more thoughtful. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a photo of the ceremony setup. "Instead of those massive flower arrangements that nobody could see over, we're doing low centerpieces with flowers from local farms. And instead of generic wedding favors that people throw away, we're donating to the literacy program at David's school in each guest's name." David pulled out his own folder. "And Sarah had this idea about the music. Instead of hiring the most expensive band available, we found this string quartet made up of high school music teachers. They're incredibly talented, but they usually only get to perform at school concerts." "This is completely different from what you described to Madison last week," Linda observed. "Because last week I was designing a wedding to prove something," Sarah admitted. "I wanted to prove that I deserved expensive things, that I was worth the investment. This time, I designed a wedding that actually represents who David and I are." "And what's that?" I asked. "People who care more about bringing our families together than impressing them. People who want to support local businesses and local artists instead of just buying the most expensive options." Sarah paused. "People who want to start our marriage by making choices that reflect our values, not our bank account." David nodded. "When Sarah told me about your real financial situation, my first reaction was panic. I thought she'd expect me to provide a lifestyle I could never afford. But then I realized that if you raised a daughter who values local farmers over fancy florists, I probably don't have anything to worry about." "You don't," I assured him. "But David, I want to talk to you about something important." He straightened up, clearly bracing for a serious conversation. "You're going to be part of this family soon, which means you're going to be part of our financial situation, whether you want to be or not. Sarah's going to inherit a substantial amount of money someday, and you two are going to make financial decisions together that will affect the rest of your lives." "I understand that, sir." "I don't think you do. Not yet. But I want to make sure you're prepared." I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. "I'm going to teach you everything I know about money, not just investing, but the psychology of wealth. How to make good decisions when you have more resources than you need. How to stay grounded when you could afford anything you want." Sarah looked interested. "Dad, what do you mean by the psychology of wealth?" "I mean the way having money changes how you think, even when you don't want it to. The way it affects your relationships, your priorities, your sense of what's normal." I thought about the last 30 years of my life. I mean learning from my mistakes so you don't repeat them. What mistakes? David asked, thinking that financial security was more important than emotional honesty, believing that I could protect you both by keeping you in the dark about our real situation, confusing being careful with money with being afraid of money. Linda joined the conversation, and thinking that living modestly was the same thing as living authentically. There's a difference between choosing simplicity and having simplicity forced on you. Over the next 2 hours, we talked about money in ways I'd never talked about it with anyone. Not as numbers on a screen or investment strategies, but as a tool that could either enhance your life or complicate it, depending on how you used it. Here's what I wish someone had told me when I first started making real money, I said. The goal isn't to accumulate as much as possible. The goal is to have enough to stop worrying about money so you can focus on everything else that matters. How do you know when you have enough? David asked. When you can make decisions based on what you want to do, rather than what you can afford to do. When you can be generous without thinking about it. When you can take risks because failure won't destroy your security. Sarah was taking notes on her phone. So the money isn't the point. The freedom is the point. Exactly. But here's the tricky part. Once you have that freedom, you have to decide what to do with it. And that's where most people with money go wrong. How? They either feel guilty about having it and try to pretend they don't, like I did, or they let it become their identity and forget who they were before they had it, or they use it to avoid dealing with problems that money can't actually solve. Linda was listening to this conversation with the focused attention she brought to parent-teacher conferences. Robert, what would you do differently if you could start over? I'd tell you the truth from the beginning. I'd include you in the decisions about how we lived and what we spent money on. I'd teach Sarah about investing when she was young, instead of trying to protect her from knowing we had money to invest. I paused, and I'd remember that being wealthy is a responsibility, not just an achievement. What kind of responsibility? Sarah asked. The responsibility to use it well, to help people who need help, to support causes that matter, to raise children who understand that privilege comes with obligations. I looked at both Sarah and David. The responsibility to make sure that having money makes you a better person, not just a richer one. David was quiet for a moment, processing. Mr. Patterson, can I ask you something personal? At this point, everything is personal. Do you enjoy being wealthy? Not the security of it, but the actual experience of having money? The question caught me off guard because I'd never really thought about it that way. Honestly, I don't know. I've been so focused on accumulating it and then hiding it that I've never really experienced it. What do you mean? I mean, I've never bought anything just because I wanted it. I've never taken a vacation just because it sounded fun. I've never donated to a charity just because I believed in their mission. Every financial decision I've made for 30 years has been about optimization and security and planning for the future. That sounds exhausting, Sarah said. It was exhausting, but it was also safe. If I never spent money on anything unnecessary, I could never make a mistake that would cost us our security. But Dad, you passed up 30 years of experiences because you were afraid of making mistakes. That's a different kind of cost. She was right. While I'd been protecting our financial future, I'd been sacrificing our present. All those family vacations we never took, all those opportunities we passed up, all those moments when we could have been more generous or more adventurous but chose safety instead. So what happens now? Linda asked. How do we start living like people who have money without becoming people we don't want to be? We start small, I said. We make some decisions that we couldn't make before and see how they feel. Your kitchen renovation, Sarah's dream wedding, David's tutoring business. We try being generous and see if it makes us happy. And if it does, then we get more generous. We find bigger problems to solve and better ways to help people. We figure out what wealthy people can do that people without money can't do, and we do those things. Sarah was smiling now, the genuine smile I remembered from her childhood. Dad, I have an idea. What's that? What if we made a list? All the things we never did because we thought we couldn't afford them. All the experiences we missed, the opportunities we passed up, the ways we wanted to help people but didn't think we had the resources. That's a good idea. What would be on your list? That trip to Italy that Mom always talked about, the art classes she wanted to take, David's master's degree program, a real honeymoon somewhere amazing instead of a long weekend at the lake. Sarah paused. And bigger things too, like funding scholarships for kids who can't afford college, or starting a program to help teachers buy supplies for their classrooms. David was getting excited. Or creating a mentorship program that pairs successful business owners with high school students who want to learn about entrepreneurship. Linda was writing down ideas as fast as they could say them. Or renovating the community center that's been falling apart for 10 years. Or funding the after-school programs that keep getting cut from the budget. I watched my family brainstorm ways to use our wealth, and I realized something important. This conversation couldn't have happened a week ago. Not because we didn't have the money, but because we didn't have permission to think this way. Permission to imagine that we could be people who solved problems instead of just worrying about them. You know what's interesting? I said. Everything you just mentioned would cost less than what I make from investments in 6 months. We could do all of it and still have more money at the end of the year than we started with. Really? David asked. Really. That's what compound interest and 30 years of growth looks like. We've reached the point where we can be incredibly generous without affecting our long-term security at all. Sarah set down her pen and looked at me seriously. Dad, why does this feel scary? Because it's new. Because we've never been people who could afford to think this way. Because once you start using money to help people, you can't unknow all the problems that money could solve. Is that bad? I don't think so. I think it's the difference between having money and being wealthy. Having money means you can buy things. Being wealthy means you can change things. Linda closed her notebook and looked around the table at our family. I think we're about to find out what kind of wealthy people we want to be. Any ideas? I asked. The kind who remember where we came from. The kind who use our advantages to help people who don't have them. The kind who raise children and grandchildren who understand that privilege is a responsibility, not just a benefit. Sarah reached over and took David's hand. The kind who plan weddings that bring people together instead of showing off. The kind who start marriages by thinking about what we can give instead of what we can get. David squeezed her hand. The kind who remember that the goal isn't to have more money, but to have more opportunities to make a difference. I looked at my wife of 28 years, my daughter who was about to become a wife herself, and the young man who was joining our family. 3 people who had spent years believing they couldn't afford their dreams, now discovering they could afford to dream bigger than they'd ever imagined. Then that's exactly who we'll be, I said, starting now.